I still remember the exact moment my career almost ended, and then took the most unexpected turn imaginable. It was a Tuesday morning in March, and I was about to present our quarterly analysis to the executive team. 3 years of flawless work, countless overtime hours, and a presentation that could secure the biggest client in our company's history. I had no idea I was walking into what would become either my destruction or my salvation. The conference room felt different that morning, colder. David Walsh, my manager, was already seated at the head of the table with that smug expression he wore whenever he was about to assert his authority. He'd been increasingly hostile toward me ever since I'd started getting recognition from upper management for my analytical work. See, David was one of those managers who got promoted not because of competence, but because he knew how to play politics and take credit for other people's achievements. Before I show you exactly how his arrogance became my stepping stone to the sweetest professional victory of my life, could you take a second to hit that like button and subscribe? Because what I'm about to share will show you how one moment of corporate cruelty can backfire in ways that seem impossible until they happen in front of a billionaire founder who values talent over politics. And trust me, you need to hear every detail of how one man's power trip destroyed everything he'd built through 15 years of intimidation. I walked into that room carrying my laptop, a stack of printed reports, and 3 years' worth of confidence in my abilities. The presentation covered our expansion into the European market, a project I'd been leading that could potentially bring in $50 million in annual revenue. I'd spent weeks perfecting every slide, every data point, every projection. Good morning, everyone, I began, setting up my laptop. Today, I'll be presenting our European expansion strategy and the potential partnership with Nexus Industries. David immediately interrupted. Actually, Rebecca, before you waste everyone's time, I need to address something. His voice carried that condescending tone I'd grown to hate. I've been reviewing your work, and frankly, I'm not impressed with your approach to this project. The room went quiet. I felt my stomach drop, but I maintained my composure. I'm sorry, David, but could you be more specific? The preliminary numbers show— The numbers? He laughed mockingly. Rebecca, you're focusing on the wrong metrics entirely. This presentation is amateur at best, and I can't in good conscience let you present subpar work to our executives. I stood there, stunned. This was the same presentation he'd approved just 2 days earlier. The same analysis that had impressed the regional director. The same strategy that our European contacts had praised as innovative and thorough. David, I'm not sure I understand. You approved this presentation on Sunday evening. You said, and I quote, "This is exactly what we need to close the Nexus deal." His face reddened. The room was getting uncomfortable, and I could see some of the executives exchanging glances. That's when David made the decision that would change both our careers forever. You know what, Rebecca? He stood up, his voice rising. I think we need to have an honest conversation here. You've been coasting on luck and other people's work for too long. This presentation proves that you simply don't belong in this position. Excuse me? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. 3 years of perfect reviews, successful projects, client testimonials, and he was questioning my competence in front of the entire leadership team? You heard me. You don't belong here. This is a high-level strategic position, and you're clearly not cut out for it. I want you to pack your things and consider whether this company is the right fit for your skill level. The silence in that room was deafening. I felt humiliated, betrayed, and completely blindsided. But what David didn't know, what none of us knew, was that someone else had been listening to every word. The conference room door, which I thought was closed, had been slightly ajar. And standing just outside, having heard the entire exchange, was someone whose presence would turn this nightmare into the opportunity of a lifetime. Excuse me. A calm, measured voice came from the doorway. Who exactly are you talking to like that? Everyone turned toward the voice, and I watched David's face drain of all color. Standing in the doorway was Jonathan Mitchell. Not just any executive, not just any manager, but the founder and CEO of our entire company. The billionaire entrepreneur who'd built this organization from a 2-person startup into a global corporation with offices in 37 countries. David stammered, "Mr. Mitchell, I didn't realize you were—" Obviously. Jonathan stepped into the room, and his presence immediately shifted the entire atmosphere. I was coming to observe this presentation I've been hearing so much about, the European expansion strategy that our regional directors have been praising. But instead, I walk in to hear you publicly humiliating one of our team members. I was frozen. This was surreal. The founder of the company, a man I'd only seen in corporate videos and annual reports, was defending me against my own manager. Jonathan looked directly at me. "Ms. Turner, isn't it? I've been reading your reports. Impressive work on the market analysis. Would you mind continuing with your presentation?" David tried to interject. "Sir, I was just explaining that the approach needs some refinement. I wasn't talking to you." Jonathan's voice was ice cold. The authority in his tone made it clear that David needed to sit down and stay quiet. I looked around the room. Every executive was staring at me, waiting to see what I would do. My hands were shaking, but I knew this was my moment. Either I would crumble under the pressure, or I would prove that David had been wrong about everything. "Of course, Mr. Mitchell. I'd be happy to present." My voice was steadier than I felt. I opened my laptop and began the presentation that would change my life. As I spoke about market penetration strategies, competitive analysis, and revenue projections, I could see Jonathan nodding approvingly. He asked intelligent questions, made insightful observations, and clearly understood the value of the work I'd put together. The Nexus partnership alone could generate $18 million in the first year, I explained, clicking to my final slide. With proper execution of this strategy, we're looking at a potential 340% return on investment within 24 months. When I finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then Jonathan started clapping. "Outstanding work, Ms. Turner. This is exactly the kind of strategic thinking we need for international expansion." He turned to address the room. "This presentation demonstrates thorough research, innovative thinking, and a clear understanding of global market dynamics. I'm curious, David." He looked directly at my manager. "What exactly was your concern with this approach?" David was sweating now. "Well, sir, I felt that perhaps the timeline was a bit aggressive, and the market research could use more." "More what?" "This is some of the most comprehensive market analysis I've seen in years. The timeline is ambitious but realistic, and the revenue projections are conservative, if anything." Jonathan's tone made it clear he wasn't buying David's excuses. "Ms. Turner," Jonathan continued, "I'd like you to join me in my office after this meeting. I think we need to discuss your role in this company and how we can better utilize your talents." As the meeting ended, I could barely contain my excitement and disbelief. The other executives congratulated me on the presentation, and several mentioned they looked forward to working with me on the European expansion. David, meanwhile, looked like he was going to be sick. But this was just the beginning. What happened in Jonathan's office that afternoon would completely transform my career trajectory and expose David's pattern of toxic behavior in ways I never could have imagined. Walking through the corridors to Jonathan Mitchell's office felt like an eternity. My mind was racing, trying to process what had just happened. The CEO of the company, a man who appeared in Forbes and gave talks at Harvard, had witnessed my public humiliation and somehow turned it into an opportunity. But I still had no idea how deep this opportunity would go. Jonathan's office occupied the entire top floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. The space was elegant but not ostentatious. Exactly what you'd expect from someone who'd built an empire through intelligence rather than inherited wealth. "Please sit down, Rebecca." Jonathan gestured to one of the leather chairs in front of his desk. His tone was completely different from the authoritative voice he'd used in the conference room. Now he seemed genuinely interested in having a conversation. I sat down, still trying to calm my nerves. "Mr. Mitchell, I want to thank you for what you did back there. I honestly don't know what would have happened if I hadn't shown up." He smiled, but there was something serious in his eyes. "Rebecca, what happened in that room wasn't a coincidence. I've been investigating David Walsh for the past 4 months." My heart stopped. "Investigating?" Jonathan opened a thick folder on his desk. "We've received 7 anonymous complaints about David's management style in the past year. Tales of credit theft, employee intimidation, project sabotage. But we needed concrete evidence before we could take action." He pulled out several documents and placed them in front of me. What I witnessed today was the final piece of the puzzle. But before we continue, I need to ask you some questions. And I need complete honesty. I nodded, my mouth dry. Of course. Has David ever taken credit for your work before? The question hit me like a punch to the stomach. I thought about the quarterly report from last year that had impressed the board. David had presented it as his own creation. The client retention strategy that had saved us 3 major accounts. David had claimed he'd developed it during a weekend brainstorming session. Yes, I whispered. Multiple times. Jonathan made notes as I spoke. Tell me about the Morrison Project. The Morrison Project. I remembered it vividly because it had been one of my greatest successes and one of David's most blatant thefts. I developed an integrated digital marketing strategy for Morrison Industries that increased their online sales by 280% in 6 months. When the results came in, David called a meeting with upper management and presented the entire strategy as his own initiative. He even had the audacity to suggest I had simply helped with implementation. And you never reported this? I laughed bitterly. To whom? David was my direct supervisor. HR always said they needed to go through the chain of command for complaints about management. I was trapped. Jonathan closed the folder and looked directly at me. Rebecca, what I'm about to tell you needs to stay between us until we complete our investigation. Can you promise me that? Yes, absolutely. David Walsh has been systematically destroying careers in this company for over 3 years. We've discovered he's manipulated performance reviews, sabotaged presentations, and even blocked promotions for employees he saw as threats to his position. My blood ran cold. How many people? 12 that we know of. Talented individuals who either quit in frustration or were transferred to other departments after David made their work lives unbearable. Jonathan paused. 3 of them were women who showed exceptional promise, just like you. The pieces were starting to fit together. Sarah Matthews, who'd left suddenly last year despite being one of our best analysts. Marcus Rodriguez, who'd been inexplicably transferred to the accounting department after developing an innovative cost reduction strategy. Lisa Chang, who'd quit just weeks before being eligible for a promotion she'd been promised for months. They were all David's subordinates, I realized. Exactly. And in each case, David managed to take credit for their best work while systematically undermining their confidence and professional standing. Jonathan leaned forward. But here's what David doesn't know. I've been building a case against him for months. Today's performance was just the final nail in his coffin. I felt a mix of relief and anger. Relief that I wasn't crazy, that David's behavior had been real and documented. Anger that it had taken so long for someone to notice and act. What happens now? I asked. Jonathan smiled, and for the first time since I'd entered his office, I saw a hint of the strategic mind that had built this empire. Now, Rebecca, we're going to give David Walsh exactly what he deserves. But first, I have a proposition for you. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city. Your European expansion strategy isn't just good. It's brilliant. The market research is thorough, the financial projections are realistic, and the implementation timeline shows you understand both opportunities and risks. Thank you, but I'm not finished. He turned back to me. I want you to lead the European expansion personally, not as David's subordinate, not as part of his team, but as the director of international strategy, reporting directly to me. I felt dizzy. Director? But I've only been with the company for 3 years. And in those 3 years, despite David's interference, you've generated more innovative strategies and successful outcomes than managers with twice your experience. Jonathan returned to his desk and pulled out another folder. These are performance metrics I had compiled independently. Your project success rate is 94%. Your client satisfaction scores average 9.3 out of 10. Your revenue generation per project exceeds company averages by 180%. The numbers were staggering. I'd never seen my performance quantified like this. David's numbers, by comparison, are mediocre at best. His success rate is 67%, and most of his successful projects, as we now know, were actually developed by his subordinates. Jonathan sat back down and looked at me seriously. Rebecca, I didn't build this company by playing it safe or following conventional hierarchies. I built it by recognizing talent and giving brilliant people the resources to succeed. You've already proven you can perform at the director level. The question is, are you ready to accept the responsibility? My mind was reeling. 3 hours ago, I thought my career was over. Now I was being offered a promotion that would typically take someone 10 years to achieve. What about David? I asked. Let me worry about David. Your focus should be on preparing to take over the European expansion project completely. We have a board meeting next week where we'll announce the new international strategy. I want you to present it as the director, not as someone's subordinate. The magnitude of what was happening was overwhelming. Mr. Mitchell, I don't know what to say. Say yes, Rebecca. Say you're ready to show this company what you're truly capable of when you don't have someone sabotaging you at every turn. I took a deep breath. This was the moment that would define my career trajectory. I could play it safe, decline the offer, and continue working under David's shadow. Or I could take the biggest professional risk of my life. Yes, I said firmly. I'm ready. Jonathan smiled broadly. Excellent. Now let's discuss what's going to happen next, because in about 48 hours, David Walsh is going to learn that actions have consequences. He opened a calendar on his desk. Tomorrow morning, David will be called into a meeting with HR and upper management. He'll be presented with evidence of his misconduct and given the opportunity to resign quietly or face formal disciplinary action. What kind of evidence? Email records showing him taking credit for subordinates' work. Performance reviews, where he deliberately underscored talented employees. Witness statements from colleagues who observed his behavior. And now, thanks to today's spectacle, we have testimony from multiple executives who saw him attempt to sabotage your presentation. I felt a surge of satisfaction, followed immediately by concern. What if he tries to retaliate against me? He can't. As of right now, you no longer report to him. Your new position comes with an immediate 40% salary increase, your own budget, and a team of analysts who will report directly to you. Jonathan handed me a formal offer letter. David Walsh has no authority over your career anymore. Reading through the offer letter, I could barely believe the numbers. Not only was the salary increase substantial, but I was being given resources I'd never dreamed of having. There's one more thing, Jonathan continued. The Nexus Industries negotiation you mentioned in your presentation. I want you to handle it personally. It's scheduled for next Friday, and if you can close that deal, it will establish your credibility as our new international strategy director. The Nexus deal. It was the opportunity I'd been preparing for, but now the stakes were infinitely higher. Success would validate Jonathan's faith in me and prove that David had been wrong about everything. Failure could end my career before it really began. I can close it, I said with more confidence than I felt. I believe you can. But Rebecca, understand that this isn't just about proving David wrong. This is about proving you belong at the highest levels of corporate strategy. The European market represents a $200 million opportunity over 5 years. If you succeed, you won't just be the youngest director in company history. You'll be positioning yourself for even greater responsibilities. As I left Jonathan's office that evening, my head was spinning with possibilities and responsibilities. I had 48 hours to prepare for the most important presentation of my life, while David remained completely unaware that his world was about to collapse. But as I would soon discover, David Walsh wasn't going down without a fight, and his desperate attempts to save his career would lead to revelations that shocked everyone, including Jonathan Mitchell himself. The next morning arrived with the kind of clarity that only comes after a life-changing decision. I arrived at the office early, energized by a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. For the first time in my career, I wasn't walking on eggshells, wondering if David would undermine my work or take credit for my successes. Around 9:30 a.m., I received a text from Jonathan. Meeting with DW starting now, new office keys on your desk. I found the keys exactly where he'd said they'd be, along with a note. Welcome to the executive floor. Your new office is 2847. Walking to the executive floor felt surreal. This was where the company's senior leadership worked. VPs, senior directors, regional managers. And now, somehow, I belonged here. My new office was 3 times the size of my old cubicle, with actual windows and a door I could close. As I was settling in, my phone buzzed with a message from Sarah Chen, one of the analysts who'd worked on the European project. "Rebecca, something weird is happening. David just got called into a meeting with HR, and he looked panicked. Do you know what's going on?" I couldn't tell her the truth, but I could see David's desperation beginning. Within an hour, I received 3 increasingly frantic emails from him. "Rebecca, I think there may have been some misunderstanding about yesterday's presentation. Can we discuss this immediately? Rebecca, I've been trying to reach you. There are some urgent matters regarding the European project that need clarification. Rebecca, it's critical that we align our stories about the presentation before any further meetings occur. Align our stories." The phrase revealed everything about David's character. Even facing termination, his instinct was to manipulate and control the narrative. I didn't respond to any of his emails. Instead, I focused on preparing for the Nexus negotiation, reviewing every detail of their business model, their expansion goals, and their decision-making process. Around 2 p.m., I heard a commotion in the hallway. Through my new office window, I could see David storming past, his face red with anger and humiliation. He was carrying a cardboard box, the universal symbol of corporate termination. 10 minutes later, Jonathan called me. "It's done. David chose to resign rather than face formal disciplinary action. He'll be gone by the end of the day." How did he take it? About as well as you'd expect. He tried to blame you, claimed you'd been insubordinate, even suggested you'd somehow manipulated me into believing false information about his management style. I wasn't surprised. David's final act was exactly what I would have predicted. Refusing to take responsibility and trying to destroy someone else's reputation to save his own. Did HR believe him? Jonathan laughed. Rebecca, when someone is presented with documented evidence of misconduct spanning 3 years, their credibility isn't particularly high. David Walsh's reign of terror is officially over. But David had one final card to play, and it would create more drama than any of us anticipated. That afternoon, I received an urgent call from Marcus Rodriguez, the analyst who'd been mysteriously transferred to accounting after developing the cost reduction strategy. "Rebecca, I heard David got fired, and I think you need to know something. He approached me an hour ago, tried to get me to sign a statement saying you'd been feeding confidential information to competitors." My blood went cold. "What?" "He offered me a recommendation letter for external positions if I'd corroborate his story. Said you'd been secretly working with European firms to undermine our expansion strategy." This was beyond desperate. This was potentially criminal. David was attempting to fabricate evidence of corporate espionage to destroy my reputation. "Did you sign anything?" "Of course not. But Rebecca, he's not just targeting you. I heard him on the phone trying to get Lisa Chang and Sarah Matthews to make similar statements. He's trying to build a narrative that you've been a security risk all along." I immediately called Jonathan and explained the situation. His response was swift and decisive. "This ends now. I'm having our legal team issue a cease and desist order. If David continues attempting to defame current or former employees, we'll pursue criminal charges for harassment and attempted fraud." But the damage was already partially done. By 5 p.m., rumors were circulating throughout the company. Some employees had heard that a director-level employee had been terminated for misconduct. Others heard that someone had been accused of sharing confidential information. The gossip mill was working overtime, and my name was being mentioned in some of the whispered conversations. That evening, as I was preparing to leave my new office, I found an envelope that had been slipped under my door. Inside was a handwritten note from David. "Rebecca, you may have fooled Jonathan Mitchell, but I know who you really are. You're an opportunistic fraud who used manipulation and lies to destroy my career. This isn't over. I have contacts throughout this industry, and I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of person you truly are. Enjoy your promotion while it lasts." Reading those words, I felt a chill. David wasn't just angry. He was planning to continue his campaign of destruction from outside the company. I immediately forwarded the note to Jonathan, who called me within minutes. "Rebecca, This constitutes written harassment and potentially criminal intimidation. We're filing a restraining order tomorrow morning. David Walsh has just graduated from fired employee to potential criminal defendant. The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation, legal meetings, and strategy sessions. The Nexus negotiation was approaching, and I knew it would be the ultimate test of whether I could perform under the pressure of my new responsibilities. Jonathan arranged for me to work directly with our legal team to prepare for the negotiation. I also received support from our international business development team, our financial analysts, and even our European regional consultants. This isn't just about closing one deal, Jonathan explained during one of our strategy sessions. This is about establishing our presence in the European market for the next decade. If we succeed with Nexus, other major European firms will see us as a serious player. The pressure was immense, but for the first time in my career, I felt like I had the support and resources to succeed. Instead of David undermining my confidence, I had an entire team working to help me achieve the best possible outcome. As the negotiation day approached, I realized that David's attempt to destroy my career had actually freed me to reach my full potential. His toxic influence had been holding me back for years, and now I was about to discover what I could accomplish without someone actively sabotaging my efforts. But the story was far from over. The Nexus negotiation would not only determine my future with the company, it would also lead to discoveries about David's misconduct that shocked everyone, including the FBI investigators who would eventually become involved. The morning of the Nexus negotiation arrived with the kind of nervous energy that either destroys you or transforms you into something greater. I stood in front of the mirror in my new office bathroom, adjusting my blazer and reminding myself that I belonged here, not because someone had given me charity, but because I had earned this opportunity through years of excellence despite systematic sabotage. The Nexus team arrived at 10 a.m. CEO Henrik Larsson, CFO Maria Santos, and their Director of Strategic Partnerships, James Chen. These weren't junior executives looking for a small partnership. These were C-suite decision-makers evaluating a potential $85 million commitment. As I led them into our main conference room, I noticed Jonathan observing from his office window. He gave me a subtle nod, not of encouragement, but of confidence. He believed I could close this deal, and that belief was worth more than any pep talk. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, "thank you for flying in to discuss what could be the most significant strategic partnership in both our companies' histories." For the next 4 hours, I guided them through a presentation that went far beyond the slides David had tried to sabotage days earlier. I had expanded the analysis, incorporated additional market research, and developed implementation strategies that addressed every concern they could possibly raise. Henrik Larsson interrupted midway through. "Ms. Turner, I have to say this level of detail is extraordinary. We've met with 6 potential partners over the past 2 months, and your understanding of our business model surpasses what some of our own consultants have provided. But the real test came during the negotiation phase. Maria Santos, their CFO, was known for being ruthless in financial discussions. She challenged every projection, questioned every assumption, and pushed for terms that would heavily favor Nexus. "Your revenue projections assume a 15% market penetration rate in year 1, she said sharply. "That's highly optimistic for a company with no established European presence." I had prepared for this exact challenge. "Actually, Maria, let me show you something." I pulled up a detailed competitive analysis. Our primary competitor, Stratton International, achieved 12% penetration in their first year with an inferior service offering and 40% higher pricing. Our projections are conservative, if anything. The back and forth continued for 2 hours. Every challenge they presented, I had data to support my position. Every concern they raised, I had already anticipated and addressed in my preparation. Finally, Henrik looked at his team, then back at me. "Ms. Turner, we came here expecting to negotiate a standard partnership agreement. Instead, you've presented us with a comprehensive strategy for European market domination. The question is, can your company deliver what you're promising?" "Mr. Larsson, let me be direct with you. 6 months ago, I might have made promises I wasn't sure we could keep. But today, I'm not just presenting a partnership proposal, I'm presenting a commitment backed by the full resources of this company and a personal guarantee that I will personally ensure its success. Jonathan chose that moment to enter the conference room. Henrik, I hope you'll forgive the interruption, but I wanted to personally assure you that Ms. Turner has our complete support. The European expansion isn't just a project for us. It's our primary strategic priority for the next 5 years. The presence of the CEO in the room shifted the entire dynamic. This wasn't just a middle management deal, this was a board-level commitment. Henrik smiled. Jonathan, in 30 years of business, I've learned to recognize when someone truly believes in what they're presenting. Ms. Turner doesn't just understand our needs, she's convinced she can exceed them. He turned to his team. Maria? James? Are you comfortable with the financial projections? Maria nodded. The numbers are solid and, frankly, conservative. If they can deliver even 80% of what they're projecting, this partnership will be extremely profitable for us. James Chen added, the implementation timeline is aggressive but realistic, and their support structure appears comprehensive. Henrik stood up and extended his hand to me. Ms. Turner, you have a deal. $85 million over 5 years, with performance bonuses tied to the benchmarks you've outlined. The room erupted in congratulations and handshakes. I had just closed the largest deal in company history, but more importantly, I had proven to myself that I could perform at the highest levels when given the opportunity. As the Nexus team left to begin their flight back to Amsterdam, Jonathan approached me with the expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of pride and genuine respect. Rebecca, in 25 years of building this company, I've seen a lot of talented people. But what you just accomplished goes beyond talent. You demonstrated leadership, strategic thinking, and execution under pressure that rivals executives with decades of experience. But the celebration was short-lived. As we were preparing to announce the successful negotiation to the rest of the company, my phone buzzed with an urgent message from our head of security. Rebecca, we need to talk immediately. We've discovered something about David Walsh that changes everything. What they had discovered would not only vindicate every suspicion about David's misconduct, it would also reveal criminal behavior that had been occurring for years, right under everyone's noses. And most shocking of all, I had unknowingly been the key to uncovering a corporate espionage operation that had cost our company millions of dollars in stolen intellectual property. The security meeting took place in a windowless conference room I'd never seen before, with Chief Security Officer Patricia Williams and 2 individuals who introduced themselves as FBI agents specializing in corporate crime. Ms. Turner, Agent Sarah Kim began, what we're about to share with you is part of an ongoing federal investigation. We need your complete discretion. My hands were shaking as I nodded agreement. Patricia opened a laptop and showed me a series of email records. Over the past 6 months, we've been tracking unusual data access patterns in our system. Someone with manager-level credentials was downloading confidential files that had no relevance to their job responsibilities. The screen showed login records, file access logs, and data transfer records, all under David Walsh's credentials. David was stealing company secrets? I whispered. Agent Kim leaned forward. It's more complex than that. David wasn't working alone. We believe he was part of a larger operation involving industrial espionage. Your presentation last week, the one he tried to sabotage, would have exposed proprietary methodologies that his co-conspirators had already sold to our competitors. My mind was reeling. That's why he was so desperate to stop my presentation. Exactly. David knew that if your European expansion strategy succeeded, it would become clear that our competitors had advanced knowledge of our plans. The timeline would have exposed his theft. Patricia showed me more evidence. We found encrypted files on David's computer containing detailed information about our client strategies, financial projections, and expansion plans. Information that somehow found its way to 3 of our biggest competitors. But how long has this been going on? Agent Kim consulted her notes. At least 18 months, possibly longer. David was systematically accessing projects he had no legitimate reason to review, then passing that information to external contacts. The scope of the betrayal was staggering. Not only had David been sabotaging careers and stealing credit, he had been selling our company secrets to competitors. "There's something else," Patricia continued. "Remember the Morrison project? The one where David claimed credit for your digital marketing strategy?" I nodded. "Morrison Industries terminated their contract with us 6 months later and signed with Stratton International, using a strategy virtually identical to yours. We now believe David sold your work to Stratton before you even finished implementing it at Morrison." The room went quiet as the implications sank in. David hadn't just stolen credit for my work. He had literally sold my intellectual property to competitors, then sabotaged its implementation at our own company to cover his tracks. "Ms. Turner," Agent Kim said, "you may not realize it, but your success despite David's interference is what ultimately exposed this operation. Your consistently excellent results, despite his attempts at sabotage, created patterns that didn't make sense. That's what triggered our initial investigation." I felt a strange mixture of vindication and horror. My career had been under attack not just by a toxic manager, but by an actual criminal who saw my talent as a threat to his illegal activities. "What happens now?" I asked. "David Walsh will be arrested tomorrow morning on federal charges of industrial espionage, theft of trade secrets, and conspiracy to commit corporate fraud. His co-conspirators at Stratton International and 2 other firms are being arrested simultaneously." Patricia closed her laptop. "Rebecca, this investigation will likely continue for months, and you may be called as a witness. But I want you to know that your integrity and persistence are the reason we were able to uncover this operation." As I left that meeting, I realized that my story wasn't just about overcoming workplace harassment. It was about unknowingly helping to expose one of the largest corporate espionage cases in our industry's history. 3 months later, I stood before the board of directors presenting our European expansion results. The Nexus partnership had exceeded all projections, generating $23 million in revenue in the first quarter alone. We had signed partnerships with 4 additional European firms, and I had been promoted to Vice President of International Strategy, the youngest VP in company history. David Walsh was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $12 million in restitution. Stratton International and their executives faced even more severe consequences, with their company ultimately declaring bankruptcy due to the criminal penalties and civil lawsuits. But perhaps the most meaningful outcome was the policy changes I was able to implement. Working with HR and upper management, we established anonymous reporting systems for management misconduct, mandatory training for all supervisors, and regular employee satisfaction audits designed to identify toxic managers before they could damage careers. The new policies were named the Mitchell Accountability Standards, but privately, everyone knew they existed because one person's courage to continue pursuing excellence despite systematic sabotage had exposed corruption that threatened the entire company. As I sat in my new office, now with a view of the entire city and a team of 12 talented professionals reporting to me, I reflected on how quickly everything had changed. 6 months earlier, I had walked into a conference room thinking my career might be over. Instead, I discovered that my career was just beginning. The real victory wasn't David's downfall or my promotion. It was the knowledge that talent and integrity ultimately triumph over politics and corruption. And most importantly, that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you can actually be the best thing that ever happened to your future. Jonathan was right that first day in his office. I hadn't built my success by playing it safe or following conventional hierarchies. I had built it by refusing to let anyone else define what I was capable of achieving. And that lesson would serve me well in the challenges that lay ahead, because being the youngest VP in company history was just the beginning of what would become an extraordinary career, built on the foundation of that terrible Tuesday morning when I thought my world was ending, but was actually just beginning to discover what I could accomplish when no one was standing in my way.